Hi everyone, welcome to Pitttown Anglican Church. Tonight we have a special conversation between Sarah Irving Stonebreaker and Gary Koo. Sarah is a member here at Pitttown Anglican, as well as senior lecturer in history at Western Sydney University. Gary Koo is the Bishop of Western Sydney, and before that he was a medical doctor. If this conversation raises any questions, please reach out to us at our website, pitttownchurch.com, or through Facebook. And now here is Sarah and Gary. Thanks.
Hi, I'm Sarah Irving Stonebreaker, and today I'm joined by Gary Koo, who is the Bishop of Western Sydney. We're going to be talking about some of life's big questions. So Gary, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you for inviting me.
So Gary, you are currently Bishop of Western Sydney, but you actually started off as a student at James Roos Ag, very high achieving. You became a medical doctor. How did you end up Bishop? Why this kind of life change?
Well, it's nothing I'd planned, Sarah. Growing up, my parents came out of Malaysia. We're a migrant family. I guess the trajectory for many migrant families is for their children to study hard, get a good job, establish themselves, buy a house. That's the dream, isn't it? The 5-bedroom house with the Camry Taraga, 2 children and enough space for the parents to come move in with you when they get older. So the path I've taken isn't quite what people expected. But we had a rude interruption into the kind of like program that we'd set out. And that was my mother. I was halfway through medical school and my mother was diagnosed with cancer. It had spread to her liver and she deteriorated very quickly. At this stage I was an atheist, didn't believe in God at all. I'd been an atheist since I was at primary school. I had a bit of a scientific type of mind, so I thought I can't see God, you can't prove God, therefore there is no God. But I was quite shaken. She was in palliative care, and I was in the room with my family as we watched her take her last breath. And from my viewpoint, to be consistent with my worldview, I should have just accepted that. That's life. That's just a change in chemical reactions. But there was something deeply disturbing about seeing someone you love die, to say there's got to be more to life than just chemical reactions. And that led to a moment of openness to challenge my presumptions and my worldview at that time. So what happened then was just a whole series of coincidences. I think God's hand were behind those coincidences, but a whole series of coincidences. As we were talking about, I was studying medicine at Sydney University. Back in those days, before texts and mobile phones, I had a lunchtime where I couldn't find my friends. And out of desperation, I was forced to pull a textbook out of my bag, which I'd never really done before. I had nothing else to do during my lunchtime. But thankfully, some Christians came on a library lawn, came up to me and asked me if I wanted to talk about Jesus. And that was the last thing on my mind that I wanted to do, but it was better than studying a textbook, which I'd never done before. So I said, yes, let's talk about Jesus. And I was a little bit surprised. It was a pleasant conversation, and what I came to realise was that being a Christian wasn't about following a certain code or obeying certain rules, but being a Christian was about having a relationship with Jesus, having Jesus at the centre of your life. Now, I just happened to be working at Macquarie Centre and what was Grace Brothers back in those days, selling televisions. And the people who met me on that lawn knew the man I was working with at Macquarie Centre. And eventually, after about 4 weeks, I summoned up the courage to tell him I'd had this encounter and talk to these people about Jesus. And then this man, Matthew Hunt, invited me to do something called Christianity Explained. And in preparation for doing that, he invited me to read the first 2 chapters of Mark's Gospel. Now, I just happened to have a Bible that a friend had given me he was no longer using. And I still remember leading up to that first meeting with my friend Matthew, opening the Bible, looking at the pages of Mark's Gospel, reading the first chapter, reading the second chapter, and then realising I needed to read on. And I actually ended up reading all 16 chapters of Mark in that one sitting. And when I came to the end of that, I was disturbed, I think is the right term. there was this growing sense of dread that I'd actually got it all wrong about Jesus all this time. I expected the Bible to be full of myth and fairy tale and to read like fiction, but it didn't. And the Jesus I met there was very real, very impressive, and I just knew that I had to do something about him. I couldn't just leave him in the corner. I think probably became a Christian at that point, and did Christianity Explained and gave my life to Jesus as a result of that. But I was reading the Bible and meeting Jesus in the page of the Bible. It really made a difference. Now, how does that lead to, from med school to becoming a bishop? I started going to church, and I was listening to a talk from a pastor at a Chinese Christian church at this stage, and he did this throwaway piece. So it wasn't the main part of the sermon, but he did this throwaway piece where he explained grace. Now, grace was not a word I'd really understood before, but grace is that whole notion of receiving something you didn't deserve, unmerited favour. God's riches at Christ's expense is the way we were taught to remember it. And when I heard that being a Christian was all about what God had done for me, and I didn't have to do anything to earn it, it was given to me for free, I thought that is the best thing in the world. Because up to that point in my life, I'd never experienced that. Everything had been about achievement, if you were smart enough, if you were worked hard enough, if you were willing to sacrifice enough, then you could get ahead. But here is a message saying, it doesn't work that way with God. And one of the problems with being, for want of a better word, a high achiever, is the pressure you feel. Because your destiny is in your own hands and how well you do. And I guess the other thing is that so much of your identity is caught up in what you're able to achieve. But as I've shared with you and with other people before, the problem with living that life of climbing ladders is that when you actually get to the top of the ladder, when you achieve that goal that you set out, all you really discover is the bottom of the next ladder. There's this unrelenting cycle of achievement, and it's never satisfying. You never get there. But here is this message of grace. God gives you everything. It actually gives you what you could never achieve for free. And as a result of hearing that, my heart was so warmed. I thought, if I am given the opportunity, if I'm the right person to do this, I would love to tell every single person who is like me, achievement-oriented, migrant kid, this great news. And God did give me that opportunity and encouragement of his church, and there's a lot of things that happened between there and becoming a bishop, but that was really the turning point, understanding grace.
Yeah, that's fascinating, especially the way that you tie in the way that grace is actually flips our entire ideology of achievement, which really just defines our entire culture on its head. And I think for those people listening, even if their particular avenue of achievement isn't career success, there is a kind of very deep way in which we are all striving to achieve something, whether it's a family, more wealth than our parents have achieved.
It's the Australian dream, isn't it? There are so many ways in which people are looking for the good life. Yep. Like you say, married with children, travel, experience, food, the perfect garden, the perfect house, the home theatre system, the cars, the share portfolio, the holiday home, etc., etc.
And there is always more.
There's always more.
The fascinating thing about this is that as a historian, like when you look back on the degree of material comforts that previous generations have achieved, our current generation, have achieved far higher degree of material comfort, and yet there's still this kind of emptiness and this sense, like you said, well, there's another ladder to climb. There's always something else. And it's like on this deep level, at the heart of achievement, there's almost this existential, and what I mean by that, I guess, is that we're trying to achieve a sense of self-worth. Like we're trying to forge our own identity in some way. What do you say to that?
I think self-worth, definitely. Self-worth, and also, I guess, our own cocoon, our own sense of security as well. That our safety and our destiny and our future are actually in our own hands. So I think that is true. There is a sense that we place ourselves at the centre of the universe, But by placing ourselves at the centre of the universe, all responsibility for our welfare is also placed in our hands.
Yeah. And it creates, I mean, like you were intimating before, when you're confronted with your mother's death, it creates a kind of burden that we can never actually lift. We can never actually completely hold this burden because people die.
Yeah. I think that's what we're facing with COVID at the moment, coronavirus. I think, again, it is a tremendous blessing to live in Australia. I've travelled a little bit. It's extraordinary. We are so blessed to be in a country which has good government, which is peaceful, where we're extraordinarily wealthy, where we live well. Yet here comes the coronavirus, and despite our technology, our wealth, our education, the fact that we're just so unencumbered in so many ways, we can do so little to stop it. We're so limited as human beings, and the other thing that goes with that is living in Australia, sometimes we think death is a long way away for us, that we're almost immortal. It's death is what happens to poor people. But no, we are mortal. Yeah. We only have a limited time on this earth. So I think there's been a real humbling, and again having us in the centre there, and here is this thing we cannot control, and what that leads to is anxiety. And I think that we've seen a lot of anxiety as a result of the impact of the coronavirus in our society.
Yeah. It seems like, I mean, you did work as a doctor for a long time. And now we're sort of talking about the nature of our current culture in Australia. There's this kind of sense in which you've been diagnosing our own culture and people physically and spiritually for a while. What's your current take on where are we as a culture? What are we living for?
I mean, that's a good question. Thanks for that question. I wonder if we're at a point in our culture where we actually don't know the answer to that. So we go looking for meaning in various things, looking for meaning, looking for understanding, looking for something that will satisfy, again, with the type of things that we've spoken about before, in terms of family and lifestyle and housing. Actually, basically, whatever you see on a reality TV show is one of the things that our society is aspiring to. The advertisers at a reality TV show show us what people are interested in. We go looking, but I just think, as much as people go looking, I don't think they'll find it. And I think one of the things I notice as a pastor, this is even for Christians, I notice as a pastor that in terms of these things that people look for, you get to a certain age, especially when you get to my age, where there's a sense of regret that all these things that I thought would give me what I wanted haven't been able to deliver on that.
Yeah, well, can I just push you on that for a moment? Because obviously, when you are going to med school, and especially as a coming from an immigrant family to Australia, you are achieving everything that your family and you had hoped for. Why wasn't that enough?
Well, I mean, it depends on your perspective, doesn't it? From the world's viewpoint, to have a high status position, to be well paid, that's enough. But then again, I've met plenty of doctors in my time, and you think they have enough, but they're not happy. They're not happy because life is more than achievement and stuff. And again, it goes back to what you were saying about the search for meaning. I mean, who are we? Why are we here? What is life ultimately all about? And I'll tell you this right now, that that's one of the wonders of being a Christian. I know why I'm here, I know what life is about, and I know where I'm going. And that allows me to live in an unencumbered fashion. It doesn't mean life is perfect. It doesn't mean life is without suffering. It doesn't mean life is without anxiety or that I don't do things I regret. But I understand. And there is a goodness to that. Yeah.
Well, let's take this idea of meaning and then pursue it from the Christian framework. What does God tell us about who we are and where meaning comes from? I mean, God tells us that we are created in his image, and I think as a historian, that is one of the things that I find most compelling and most profoundly true, in the sense that, on the one hand, yes, we're created in God's image, and yet something has gone disastrously wrong with the world. And so we have simultaneously we've been created with immense worth and value, and yet we are, in our very nature as humans, people who want to turn away from God, turn away from our Creator.
Look, I think that has great explanatory power, doesn't it, to our lived experience. And again, super helpful. When I look in the mirror, it's not the prettiest sight in the world, but I can see that I'm of great value. I've been created in the image of God. When I see you, when I see the people in the streets, these are people who God created and loves, are important.
Yes.
So that really changes the whole way you interact with other people, and the whole way you view value. Yep. That the value of a person isn't merely boiled down to what they can offer us or society. And it has implications for things such as disability, refugees, and aged care as well.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, your comment just then about the inherent dignity of human beings, I think it's really important to remind ourselves, and this is actually something that I learned in my own journey from atheism to Christianity, is that without Christianity, if we just look at the natural world as it is, I mean, if we are just matter and energy, nature gives us no way for being able to say that, the person with a disability or people of different races and capacities are of equal moral worth to other people. That is something we rely upon Christianity for.
Mm. Yet at the same time, isn't it interesting, Sarah, that we're these people who are, beautifully, wonderfully made by God in His image, His ambassadors to the creation, yet we're not that good. No, we're not that good. We behave appallingly towards each other. We are self-centered. And one of the things that I've said in some of my talks in the past was there's two things you never need to teach a child growing up. One is to love hot chips, and the second one is to know the word mine. You don't have to teach a child what is mine. They just know inherently, and I think that just points to the deep flaw in our human natures, our self-centeredness, and the Bible explains that. It's got, again, a great explanatory power, just in terms of the word sin, in terms of the fact that all of us place ourselves, our needs and our wants, in our own way before God. And that leads to not only a broken relationship with God, but damaged relationships with each other. And if you think about it, if I think I'm more important than God and you think you're more important than God, then when we meet, we might get on like happy families, but until we disagree. And then we have disharmony and conflict, and that's why we see that the world around us is not the utopia that it could be.
Yeah, it's good to have that reminder there that sin is this, at its heart, this turning towards the self rather than God, a rebellion against God. Because I think a lot of people, non-Christians, think that, well, Christians, what they mean by sin is there are certain things that you can't do. It's about doing and not doing certain things, obeying or not obeying certain rules. No, at a deep level, no, sin is a rebellion against God, a turning towards the self.
Yeah. It's an orientation, and it manifests itself in poor behaviour. It's a bit like the difference between a disease and a symptom, right? So, you might have a virus, right? That's the disease, but the symptom is a temperature, or a runny nose, or a cough, or whatever. So, deep down we have this disease, which is sin, which makes us less than we should be. We were created in the image of God, yet we fail to exercise that image in the way that we should, damaging our relationship with God at the creation and our relationship with each other. So we're interesting, aren't we? I mean, just in terms of such tremendous dignity and potential, yet inability to fully exercise it.
Yeah. Oh, and I think even historically, when you look at different societies, different civilizations historically, even the non-Christian ones, they are enmeshed in this kind of paradox where on the one hand they recognise that human beings are striving to be something more than what we now call matter and energy, and yet on the other hand it culminates, I mean, just take the the atheist totalitarianism of Nazism in the 20th century, or communism, it culminates in disaster triumphant.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, we don't want the Ubermensch, I mean, the overman, because we can't trust them.
Right. And yet that is us. So what we're kind of alluding to there is some atheist philosophy, and particularly Friedrich Nietzsche. But really what we're saying is that if we try to create the ideal society out of human value, it actually culminates in the gulags or the concentration camps, because we have nothing but.
I mean, because of our sin, we will always dominate one another.
Yes. Yeah, which was at the heart of what Nietzsche was arguing. Right. So, and this actually ties us back to grace, which is something that you brought up earlier. God has a solution for our sin problem, and it comes back to love and grace.
That's right. I mean, this is the flip again, isn't it? God, who is all powerful, all knowing, who deserves everything. Jesus, as God, for whom and through whom all things were made. Given our behaviour, he doesn't have to do anything. Yet, in Philippians chapter 2, he humbles himself. He has it all, humbles himself, comes and lives among us as a human being, sharing our experience, sharing in our suffering, and then going that next step out of love to give up his life for us, so that we can be the people that God created us to be, so that we can have a new destiny and a new future, which we could never obtain by ourselves. It's quite extraordinary.
Yeah. Well, and the way that I think ties into this problem that we were talking about that affected us both in different ways personally earlier, which is that without God, we're basically left in a situation where we're trying to achieve or pursue our own self-worth or identity. But in Christ, that identity and that proper relationship with God is given to us. So it takes us out of ourselves and enables us then to live outside of to direct ourselves to live for God instead.
And live for God. And there's not only that, not only are we made right with God and forgiven and able to see things in a different way, God himself comes and dwells in us through his Holy Spirit. So again, we become changed as well. And we grow to be more like Jesus as we read the Bible, as meet God's people, as the Spirit works in our heart, so that we who are the recipients of grace can now be the givers of grace as well, which transforms relationships. Again, rather than seeing the people around us as in terms of what can they do for me, we can now turn that around and see the people around us, what can I do for them? How can I bless them in the way that the Lord Jesus has blessed me? And again, transforms communities, transforms families, transforms life. And can I just say, transforms the individual experience of life to be a giver rather than taker is a better way to live.
Yeah. Yeah. And so it all comes back to Jesus, doesn't it? I mean, one of my favourite verses that I think really just exemplifies what you were just saying is that that Jesus doesn't come into the world to, quote, to be served, but rather to serve and give his life as a ransom for many. So Christians are living into, because of Christ working in us, living into the image of Jesus, God who is now flesh, who is somebody who is entirely given to the service of others.
And, in the end, it's the ultimate example of love, isn't it? If we define love as being more than just feeling warm and fuzzy towards somebody, but love as actually seeking what is best for the other, placing another person before ourselves, then Jesus is the ultimate example of that in his service, in his sacrifice, in his humility, in his other-centeredness. And again, frankly, we need more of that.
Yeah. And you mentioned earlier it transforms lives. I mean, just to take an example that I think is especially present in my mind at the moment. So our minister, Greg, is dying of brain cancer, but his experience of dying from cancer is completely different as a Christian to the way it would be were he a non-Christian. In his good death, Greg is living to glorify God, and people are drawn to that, and his suffering is transformed because he knows that this suffering in this world is not the end.
No, he knows that. To live is Christ, to die is gain. He knows where he's going. He knows that he's safe in Jesus' hands. It doesn't diminish his suffering, doesn't diminish the grief people feel. But again, that knowledge that you are okay is tremendous for the families and for Greg. But not only that, it is interesting, isn't it, how a Christian community plays a part in this as well. I mean, Greg is not suffering. Greg and Sue are not suffering alone. They're suffering in community, and you've got this community of grace, which is deeply concerned for them. And it's not just a matter of the system or the government to care for those who are ill, but the community, the Christian community gathered around Jesus, formed by Jesus, shaped by Jesus, which makes such a difference in this very difficult circumstance as well.
Yeah. And this is all made possible because Jesus himself knew our suffering, right? This is not a God who kind of stands back from the world, like the Greek gods who decide to toy with human beings for amusement. No, Christ comes into humanity in order to have his body torn apart and to know suffering, to inhabit it.
It's not like the Bette Midler song where God watches us from a distance. Jesus weeps. Jesus is hungry. Jesus suffers. He is taunted. He knows loss. He knows longing. He knows what it means to be human because he was. Yet he gives up everything for us so that we can be the people that God created us to be.
Yeah. I think it's just a final question, Gary. What, if I could just put it succinctly, what do you find most compelling about Jesus?
I think what is most compelling about Jesus is his love. Is his love. It's quite extraordinary, just his willingness to come from the Godhead to live with us. I mean, I can't even think of an analogy, that would help explain that. I mean, I was again, going back to Philippians chapter 2, I'm trying to illustrate it. What's an illustration? What's the equivalent? Let me think, for a human being becoming a virus or a bacteria or a speck of dust. I thought, no, it doesn't. He's God. Yet, not only does he become a human being, with all the limitations that come with that, but then he dies for us. He who is innocent gives up everything for the guilty. Go to Romans chapter 5. That's how God demonstrates his love for us. That, while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. And from our own perspective, for a good person, we might die, a righteous person might die, a good person possibly, but, Jesus dies for us. And even though we have tickets on ourselves and think that we're wonderful and that we're really worth dying for, we all have those moments, don't we, where we look at ourselves, the things that we've said, the things that we've done, the things that we've thought, and we do wonder, could God really love me if he knew what I was really like? But the cross of Jesus shows us that God knows what he's like, what we're like, and he has loved us. And again, can I just say, that is a terrific way to live, knowing that we are accepted and loved despite ourselves.
Yeah. Gary, thank you so much for joining me.
Yeah, thanks, Sarah. It's been wonderful.
So if my conversation with Gary this morning has perhaps raised questions for you, maybe there's things you would like to look at more closely about the Bible, about Christianity, about following Jesus, then my husband and I are actually teaching a course called Introducing Jesus, and we'd love to have you join us. It's very low key. You can ask any question you like, and there's more information about it on our website.